I'm going to switch a little bit, and I know we've got a lot of focus on wetlands, and I'm going to try to make a connection to some of the wetlands uh, that you guys have been talking about. I appreciate some of the other presentations that I've seen, and I've learned a lot, and that's the thing. So today, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge some of our staff and our funding, and the work that I do with freshwater mussels is definitely a team effort. It requires a lot of people from a lot of different organizations, and over time, I've been able to meet a lot of really interesting people. And but when we work together, we can get things done that we can't do independently. And so it's always good to try to work together as much as you can. So if you ever want to help out with mussel stuff, feel free to contact me. We always have opportunities to come help and volunteer and do things. Just a note, since we are on virtual, just to know that this is my family. Just want to say from my family, yours, hello, and to say that I've developed a couple of biologists, a waterfowl biologist and an environmental science biologist, that my older two boys in the middle there. So hopefully I'll contribute a few more to the biology field down the road. I have 6 kids, of course. Anyway, I work at the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Center for Mollusk Conservation, which is now its 20th year. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that we do here and beyond, out into the field and all this kind of stuff. So if you have questions throughout, please feel free to put it in the chat and I'll try to get to it. And if I don't answer it right away, it might be because I'm getting ready to cover it. Well, our facility is located in Frankfort, Kentucky. It's on the Kentucky River system. And we have a multifaceted facility that can do about every aspect of the mussel culture. And I'll talk a little bit about what we do. Just to introduce some of our staff, we have several staff here at our facility, some fairly new, some been here a long time. And so if you happen to know one of those and want to reach out to them, feel free to do so. Just want to highlight some of our accomplishments over the years. In 2013, we won a group award with our agency for the work that we've been doing with freshwater mollusk. So I want to highlight some of these guys are not with us anymore, but we still have some of the original group that got that are with us still. I want to just kind of give you a little bit of background on how things have changed since, I was in the school in the 1980s, and how we've changed the way we look at species and how we observe them. So just to give you an example, here's the change in digital technology with underwater cameras, now from one fit in your pocket to one to fit in your truck. And it's really changed the way we can capture images and the way we can observe behavior and things in the wild. Cell phones, computers. I mean, I went to college all the way through undergrad system without a computer. So yes, you can do that. And now it'd be almost impossible to do that. So we depend so much on our smartphones and devices now that it's changed the way that we approach and study animals. How we get to these places, it's really changed, from horses to buggies to canoes to these high-tech electric vehicles that are coming out in the next few years. So it really does change the way you do business when you have different kinds of technologies to be able to get to places. We even changed the way we cover our face now. And this is because of COVID. We've had to adapt as well. Now, I'm not going to stick my head underwater with this on, but just to show you that, we do have to change, and we have to adapt, and we have to learn new things. So learning is a process we continue to do every day. Well, I'm going to talk about freshwater mussels today, and even throughout all the changes that we've had to go through and all the things I've studied, the mussels still have a shell, and they still live in the bottom of the rivers and stuff. So I haven't approached them much differently other than the technology to find them. Most people, when they think about mussels, they think of a mussel, and they sometimes even spell them incorrectly. This is the correct spelling of a person's mussel. But what I'm talking about today are freshwater mussels, and most of the time people think about something they eat, or they think about something pretty in a shell, maybe something like this, or something like this, which is on the beach. Sometimes even things in the marine environment they consider mussels as well. Maybe you're in a canoe and you're traveling up and down the river, and you see a little pile of shells up on the bank, and you pick them up and say, hey, I wonder how they got there. And so you may experience them that way as well. Maybe you're canoeing, you get out and take a break, and you see this little trail, and at the end of this little trail, you see a little mussel, and it's trying to find its way to deeper water. Maybe you've collected some shells and you have a lot of different colors and you just like the way they look. And so there's other reasons people study them. Sometimes you're out and you may be studying mammals, and you're wanting to see, the muskrat and how it's collected these shells and what kind of species it's feeding on. Maybe you were fortunate and you were in a water body and you saw something like this. Maybe this is the first time you've ever seen something like this. This is a freshwater mussel, and most people haven't seen them this way. And a lot of mussels do something like this, and I'm going to describe a little bit what it's doing and why this is a mussel and how it's trying to reproduce. Freshwater mussels have a very complicated life cycle. The females and males have separate sexes, and they have internal fertilization. And the larvae they produce, called a glaucidia, has to come in contact with a fish host. And once it comes in contact with the fish host, it lives on its gills for 3 or 4 weeks, drops off after that period of time, starts its life as a juvenile, and then can live anywhere from 20 to 30 to even a couple hundred years, depending on the species. So freshwater mussels can improve their chances of getting their larvae on a fish by going and fishing. And so here's one of a lure that's trying to draw in a little sunfish, and the sunfish sees this worm-looking thing and strikes it, and all of a sudden it gets a mouthful of mussel larvae. Or maybe you're out in the water and you're canoeing, and you stop and you see this little white thing on the bottom, and it's just a pair of siphons sticking out, and it's all you see. The mussel is completely buried, and you're wondering about how it got there and how it lives in all that environment. And you think about how mussels are very important when it comes to removing solids in water. So here's a little experiment I did where I hooked up 2 equal tanks and dumped some mud of equal volume and put mussels in one and another. Didn't have any. And within an hour, the mussels pulled all the silt out of the water. And so you can see that they're very efficient at filtering and removing suspended solids and other things like that. And that's what they're doing. They're eating and also getting rid of the stuff they don't want as well at the same time. So in the United States, North America, we have the Ohio and Mississippi River systems, which is a tremendous diversity of aquatic species. And I want to talk about mussels in particular that are in these particular systems. In Kentucky, we have 10 major river systems. Most of you are familiar with a lot of these. But we have a large number of freshwater mussels present in each of these, anywhere from 26 to up to over 80 species, depending on what water system you're in. Notable exceptions are the Green and the Upper Cumberland and Lower Cumberland. I have a large number of species, over 70-something species. But unfortunately, we have a lot of rare species. Out of the over 105 species of mussels in Kentucky, we have about 27 that are federally listed as threatened or endangered. So that's a fairly large percentage. Kentucky contains about 35% of North American mussel fauna. And within a couple, maybe 3 years or 4 years, we'll have about 35 species that are on the list of threatened and endangered. So over a third of our species will be threatened and endangered of freshwater mussels. So how does that relate to other endangered species we have in the state? You can see this chart here. It shows that we have about 7 endangered fish, 2 crustaceans, 8 plants, 4 mammals, but the majority of the endangered species we have here in the state are freshwater mussels. We also have species of greatest conservation need. We have 46 species of mussels that are on that, while we have other groups may have also a large number. I would want to say something about that. A lot of the species on the greatest conservation need are in the water or they're connected to the water. So that's something I want you to think about a little bit to the rest of this. Well, Kentucky has always been important for mussels back in the early 1800s, even before. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about why they're significant. They're some of the first fishing lures. And if you're out and you into a river and you see this little thing flapping, these eye spots, and it's not an injured fish that's trapped on the bottom of a rock, it's a freshwater mussel trying to go fishing for its host fish, in this case, a largemouth bass. They also have fishing worms. So there's one of the first fishing worms that were out there was a freshwater mussel lure. So you can see in the upper right, this is a worm it's actually a package of larvae, 10,000 or so larvae. The fish will eat that and get infested and complete its life cycle. Mussel's also been used for tools, like the washboard. It's got a pretty interesting name, but they basically take the old washboards and rub their clothes against it, and it's how they would clean their clothes back before we had all these other products, like a washing machine, for instance. They were also some of the first clothing accessories. And also some of the first non-safe ways to collect these things were developed in the early 1900s. This is one of the first diving. So you're depending on this guy up on this shanty boat to pump air down to your gas tank that's been modified so you can breathe underwater. So people went to extremes to collect these things. And as a result of the product that they were trying to get. In this case, it was the button industry that was developed in the 1800s, early 1900s. And several industries were developed in like the Midwest to basically harvest freshwater mussels and to produce buttons. And here's what the product they had. Well, a guy from Japan came up with an idea that he took North American mussels and stuck them in a marine oyster over in Japan and China, that they would produce a synthetic, or not a synthetic, but a cultured pearl. And so the cultured pearl industry developed, and it took off until about the 1980s, until the Chinese figured out a way to not use freshwater mussels from North America to make these pearls. But here's some of the ones that they would commonly use. The bottom right is the ring pink. It used to be one of the most commonly sought after mussels, and now it's one of the most endangered. So anytime you have a product that you're trying to get out of wild and you overharvest, that causes problems. And here's a shell pile where they were just basically collecting everything that was in the river and utilizing them for an industry. Well, these combined factors led to a lot of impairment, overharvest, and I'll talk about a couple other things too. But we know water is very important to mussels, and we know it's limited. Even though it looks like there's a lot on Earth, fresh water is very, very small. And I did a little example here. This tiny little dot on this map is basically represents the entire volume of water in the Licking River system. So I know we have a lot of water. It looks like it, but relatively speaking on Earth, it's a very, very tiny amount. And so the amount of water we have, fresh water that are available for mussels, is really small relative to what we have. But the water we do have produces a lot of habitats for species, from large lakes to rivers to wetlands, and the mussels depend on all of these to some extent, and I'll kind of go over how that works. Well, mussels and other aquatic species have seemed to be hit the hardest when it comes to impairment, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One is exotic species, dams, pollution, all kinds of things, habitat destruction. And I'm going to cover these just a second. Pollution is one thing. We know that there's all kinds of things going on: industrial plants, land disposal, just harmful chemicals, agriculture runoff, you name it. You could just keep going and on, and there's just one thing after the other. We just like to dump things in rivers for some reason, but that doesn't work very good for the animals that live there. But we also like to produce dams and dam things up and harness that water power or whatever it is. But it comes at a cost. We have over 75,000 dams in the United States. Texas alone has over 6,800. And as a result of that, there's a lot of habitat change that's associated with those. Here's just a slide showing the number of dams we have in Kentucky, the major dams. That's not counting the small ones. So the last one was just built in 2020 on the lower Ohio River. There's not any new ones that we know right now that are going in. And a lot of these are now trying to come out, which is good. Here's just a map showing those 75,000 dams. So we've definitely altered our water, and as a result, the mussels and other aquatic species have suffered from it. Just in Kentucky alone, you can see some of the dams that are found throughout the state, and so they're everywhere. Fortunately, some of the dams that were built early 1900s are now coming out. 2016, upper right there, Green River Locking Dam 6 reached, and now today it looks at the bottom, you can see it looks more like a natural river. I want to say a little bit about wetlands. Wetlands, we also know, have declined a lot here's just a slide I found that showed we had 50% wetland loss from 1950 to 1990. And this is also a time when we saw significant declines in freshwater mussels. They may be connected to some extent, and I'm sure some of it does cause that. Habitat change. Anytime we go out and we change a river, either channelize it or cut it, whatever we do, divert it, it's going to change the hydrodynamics of that and change the resources of the food as well. We know that all that silt from the landscape, from the side and the hills, ends up in a big pile, and the streams carve it out. All that sediment has to go somewhere, and it ends up in the big rivers. And you can see the muddy water from all that erosion. So with that, in the state of Kentucky, we have a lot of places still, though, fortunately, that we do have. All these red areas are outstanding state resource waters. That's places where we have a lot of good things still. A lot of rare mussels and fish and other things are found in these areas where it's red. There's still some places left, and that's a good thing. So now we know that. We know we have places we can work with. We know there's been conservation actions in a lot of places. So what do we do with the mussels? Do we continue to watch them go downhill, or do we step in and try to do something to prevent the declines? So I want to talk about that. So mussel conservation areas, we've established these across the state. And these are basically any of these little red areas or gray areas where we have a high number of rare species. So we want to go in and work in these areas because we have conservation easements, we have land management practices that are in higher amounts in these areas compared to other areas. So we want to go into areas that we know that maybe the trends are reversing. So in the Center for Mollusk Conservation here in Frankfort, we have several buildings that we raise freshwater mussels, and I want to talk about how we do that. So we raise juveniles. We do that with high-tech culture apparatus. Here's an example of some high-tech equipment we use to raise the food of the mussels, which we know is algae and other things. We keep them in these simple systems where we can raise, each one of these little tanks you're seeing on the screen can hold about 3,000 mussels when they're less than 3 months old. So we have a capacity for about 360,000 mussels at any one time, and then we have raised a lot over the past. So what we do to raise mussels, we take a known mussel, we bring it into captivity, get the larvae out of them, inoculate them by putting them on the fish's gills, but usually knock the fish out, put them to sleep, and then we put them on there and then wait for the juveniles to come off. We also have developed some really high-tech equipment and technology that people from all over the world have come to see how we do it. And one of these things is called in vitro culture. And so what we've been doing with that, I started it in 2004, so it's almost 20 years now in the making. But what we're able to do is we're able to take mussels, put them in a petri dish in an incubator with a special serum, usually either rabbit or fish, and then we're able to produce, put 100,000 mussels, for instance, in just about 20 dishes. And then about 2 or 3 weeks later, we'll have little juveniles crawling around in the dishes. And so we can skip the fish host, and it's high tech. When I started in 2004, we had only done about 19 species in the world, and now we're up to over 70 something. So we've really expanded this technology. And here's what these animals look like: these tiny juveniles that we're raising of extremely rare species. Juveniles of these species have not even been seen in the wild, and we're raising them by the hundreds, even by the thousands. So we have the capability of producing mass quantities of these animals in captivity and then to put them out into the wild. So we also do some mussel research at our facility. In addition to raising mussels, we do stream monitoring, population monitoring, and I'll talk a little bit about that. We also do fish host testing. Just to give you an example of where last year we tested a rough pigtoe, which is an endangered species, and we tested about 10 species and only found one to work. We've also been developing a diet for freshwater mussels over the last several years. And what we've learned is, they feed on a lot of algae. And then more recently, we add this organic component that's really connected to wetlands. So if you're interested in what we feed our mussels and how it's connected to wetlands, let me know. But we use probiotics, we use organic processed food that we can use to add in and give them the most natural food possible. We also have 2 branch hatcheries that we grow out mussels. Once they leave the Frankfort facility, we take them to either Minor Clark Hatchery, or where we put them in cages and in ponds and raceways, or we take them to a brand new facility that we're working with in cooperation with Wolf Creek National Fish Hatchery. And basically, we have built a boathouse, courtesy of the Kentucky Waterways Alliance, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where we actually have mussels inside this floating garage, basically. And here's what they look like. These floating baskets, these cages that are below the surface can have hundreds of mussels, and we can produce and rear out in a natural environment here at this facility, at this lake, and save us some cost in Frankfort. So each year we go out in November or so at the end of the year, and we pull the mussels out of the cages, and we try to see what we've got after we put in. We usually have pretty good survival and good growth there as well. And here's just some examples of some mussels that are just a few months old, less than 2 years for sure, and how that we can raise them to a very large size in a short amount of time. So what do we do with all these mussels that we raise? So one of the things we can do, and we've done, is we take and try to restore rivers. So the good example of this is the licking. The licking has about 56 species historically. 7 species are gone or used to be gone. 1 is extinct and 6 are extirpated. So what we decided to do is let's go bring animals back either through culture or through translocation from another place, even another state, and let's restock the licking back to its original fauna. So we started doing that in 2014, 15, 16. And as of 2020, we have 98% of the original species that were in the Licking River now in the river. Some by the thousands, some by just the few, but we're working on improving and increasing the numbers to get the species back to its full complement. And this is a one-of-a-kind thing that you just don't see anywhere. Where do we take and restore the biodiversity of a river system? But that's some of the things that we can do with this culture that we do. Just to show you the numbers of mussels that we do raise, this in 2021, we have about 60,000, a little under 60,000 juveniles that we have in captivity that are growing, that'll be released this year. As a result of that, that's a lot of mussels to tag before we release them. So if you want to help tagging mussels sometime this summer, let me know, and you're welcome to come help us tag some of these animals before they go back to the wild. We do a lot of monitoring of these once they go back to the field. So example of this is the Green, for instance. Green is one of the largest tributaries left of the Ohio River system outside of the Tennessee and Cumberland, and it's mostly all contained within Kentucky. It has a lot of habitat for freshwater mussels, and is doing fairly well. It has over 70-something species with 17 federally listed species. And so we have several sites on the Green where we go out and we put these grids down, and we dig what we find in the water to see what kind of numbers and diversity and tracking individuals that we put out. And just to give you an example, in 2004, 9, 14, and 19, we went out to a site, and we can see that the overall mean, which is about the fifth row down, has basically been on the increase. So we're seeing a mussel increase versus a decline in several places in the Green. A lot of species that were rare 20 years ago are now starting to become not so rare. Some of that is a result of our stocking. An example is the pink mucket. We've only found 15 or 20 live individuals in the Green in the last 30 years. And now we have several thousand that are out in several places in the Green River system. So this is something that we can do. We can do it effectively, and it is showing some benefit. I also mentioned a project that we're working with one of our visiting scientists here, Dr. Wendell Haig. He is a scientist that's based out of our office here. He works for the Forest Service. He has a project where he's putting these little cages out into the wild all over the country. We're putting juveniles that we've reared in these cages and letting them see how they're doing in these streams that we know they're problems, or maybe streams that are doing well. Here's what they look like. They're called mussel silos. So if you're ever out and you see something like this, it's not a landmine, but I would be cautious because it might be. But it's not a landmine. It's a little cage, and we put these mussels in, and we tag them, and we're going to see how good they grow. We also can process these up and look for any kind of contaminants they might harbor. And we're really learning a lot about what's causing declines of aquatic species by using this cage approach. I just also mentioned we also work with snails. So if you're interested in freshwater snails, we've been working on some stuff with that for the last couple of years, and with the species, with the SWIG grants and stuff coming in, we may be doing some more work with these. So just keep that in mind as well. And I'm working on a guide to snails so we can figure out what we have, because there's really not much work been done with them at all. They're kind of cool looking. If you look at them live, they don't look anything like you think. And it's just long snouts and tentacles and stripe patterns, and they produce these little feces and stuff. And they're pretty amazing. They're also very tolerant of a lot of water chemistry. Here's some of the mussels that were released in 2021. We released about 4,000 of the Kentucky creek shell, which is going to be one of our next listed endangered species. So before it gets listed, we're trying to produce quite a few of them to put out. And there's several other species as also that we've released this year. Cat's paw is one that we've done this year as well. That's only found in one place in northern Ohio. And now we've released them about 10 locations throughout 4 different states over the last 5 years. Here's the Kentucky creek shells that we released last year with some of the work we've been doing with the Nature Preserves, the Office of Nature Preserves. Mike Compton here and I will release some back in this fall, and it's exciting to see hundreds of these things that you were able to produce to release back into the wild. We also released Cumberland mean in the upper Cumberland River system. This species I found maybe 3 or 4 over the last 2 or 3 years, and maybe 10 or 12 over the last 10 or 15 years, and then we released 1,600 of them this year, and we've released over 4,000 or 5,000 over the last 3 or 4 years. So we're able to take just a few mussels and produce quite a bit. Here's the cat's paw we released in Mammoth Cave National Park in the Green River system. The pink mucket, again, all the locations where we released them, and we are finding those now in our monitoring. They're showing up. They're starting to reproduce. So we're excited about one day that we can just back off and leave them alone, and they'll start doing their own thing. Again, if you're interested in helping us volunteer with tagging or whatever, feel free to contact me. And here's an example of some of the tagging we do with super glue and these little number tags, and also with pit tags as well. So just in kind of summary, we've propagated over 75 species of mussels out of the 105 we have. Several rare ones, some of them the last ones on Earth. And so we're able to do some things that no one else really can do. And we've been pioneering this field here for a while now. And people are coming from other states to see how we do it. And we're willing to share anything that we do. We also have the pit tags. Most of you that work with amphibians or fish or anything might have these as well. So we have a pit tag reader. We can actually go in and find a particular mussel if we're looking for it. And we try to do that as well. So the last thing I want to say is the future. What's the future? You know, it's pretty exciting that we can take these electric planes, land on a site remotely in Kentucky, take a mussel, take the larvae out, put them in a petri dish, take them back to the lab, produce them, and then fly them back one day and leave the adults there in the stream. And we're able to do that now. So it's amazing that we can do some crazy things that I never even thought about when I started this field back in the 1980s. So with that, I'm going to take any questions. I think we got maybe a couple minutes for some